"We brought in real experts," Preston Blake said, and every red warning light in the control room seemed to burn brighter against Nathan Brooks's tired face. The main operations floor of Hayes Meridian Systems was supposed to be a place of precision: glass walls, elevated monitors, quiet confidence, and moving data streams that kept medical supplies, food shipments, and emergency inventory flowing across 7 states. But at 8:42 p.m., only hours before the largest investor demonstration of the year, the room looked less like the future and more like a storm trapped indoors. Screens flashed red. Automated routing maps froze mid-cycle. Conveyor simulations stuttered across the wall display. Somewhere deep in the building, the central server fans hummed like a nervous breath. Nathan stood at the primary console with his sleeves rolled to his elbows, one hand over the keyboard, the other resting near a paper cup of coffee gone cold. He had been there since before sundown, quietly tracing the failure across the system while everyone else argued above him. To most of the day staff, he was just the night shift technician, the single dad who worked odd hours, fixed invisible problems, and left before executives arrived. But Nathan did not look at titles when a system was hurting. He looked for rhythm. He looked for the moment where one signal stopped trusting another. "Step away from the console," Preston said, walking in with Victoria Hayes, 3 board members, and the sharp confidence of a man who enjoyed having witnesses. Victoria's navy blazer was perfect, her posture controlled, but her eyes showed the strain of someone carrying a company and a legacy on the same tired shoulders. She looked at the red screens, then at Nathan. "Mr. Brooks, Preston says the external team is on the way." Nathan did not move at first. "They are going to chase the wrong failure." Preston gave a small laugh. "You see, that is exactly the problem. Vague warnings, old instincts, no clear timeline. We need certified crisis specialists, not a night guy guessing from a chair." The words landed in the room with a clean, public cruelty. A junior analyst looked down at her tablet. Someone near the back stopped typing. Through the glass wall behind them, Nathan could see the employee break room, where his 7-year-old daughter, Ellie, slept curled on a small couch beneath her pink backpack, waiting for him to finish another late shift. Nathan's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed quiet. "If you reset the north routing cluster before checking the sync delay, you will make the error look fixed for about 6 minutes. Then it will come back wider." Preston turned toward Victoria as if presenting proof. "This is what I mean. He cannot let go." Victoria stared at Nathan for one long second. She was 31, young for a chief executive officer, young enough for every mistake to be called inexperience and every hesitation to be called weakness. Tomorrow's demonstration could secure a national contract. Failure could give the board the excuse it had been waiting for. She drew a breath. "Nathan," she said, softer than Preston but not soft enough, "please step back." The control room went still. Nathan looked at her, not angry, only disappointed in the way quiet people are when they realize respect has not been lost because it was never given. Then he removed his employee badge from around his neck, placed it beside the keyboard, and stepped away. Preston smiled. The red screens kept blinking. And as Nathan walked toward the break room where Ellie slept, he glanced once at the frozen data map and whispered, almost to himself, "They are going to hear it too late." Nathan Brooks did not walk fast after Victoria told him to step back. He had learned that dignity moves at its own pace. The control room kept flashing red behind him, full of voices, titles, and the kind of urgency that sounded impressive until it solved nothing. He crossed the polished floor without looking at Preston Blake, without defending himself, without trying to remind anyone of the nights he had spent keeping Hayes Meridian Systems alive while the day staff slept. Through the glass, the employee break room glowed softer than the operations floor, lit by one vending machine, one table lamp, and the pale reflection of frozen data screens beyond the wall. Ellie was still asleep on the couch, knees tucked beneath her, one cheek pressed against her pink backpack. Her shoes were lined neatly under the table because Nathan had taught her that even tired people could leave things better than they found them. Ruth Coleman, the older security guard, sat nearby with her thermos and a paperback novel folded closed in her lap. When she saw Nathan enter, she stood slowly. "They did it again, did they not, Mr. Brooks?" Nathan gave her a small tired smile. "They brought in help." Ruth looked past him toward the control room, where Preston was pointing at a monitor like a man conducting a rescue he did not understand. "That is not what I asked." Nathan did not answer. He only walked to Ellie and pulled the small fleece blanket higher over her shoulder. The movement was gentle, practiced, full of the quiet love that never asked for witnesses. Ellie stirred anyway, blinking up at him. "Daddy? I am here, sweetheart. Is the big system fixed?" Nathan sat on the edge of the couch. "Not yet." She looked toward the red lights beyond the glass. "Are they mad at you?" "No," Nathan said, "because fathers sometimes protect children from the sharpest version of the truth." Ruth made a soft sound, almost a sigh. Ellie rubbed her eyes. "If you are good at fixing it, why do they not know?" Nathan looked at the badge still missing from his neck, then at the tiny milk carton Ruth had left on the table for Ellie earlier, the worksheet with half-finished spelling words, the lunchbox he had packed before dawn after only 4 hours of sleep. His days began at 6 in the morning with toast, school drop-off, laundry, grocery lists, and braided hair he still never got quite even. His nights belonged to servers, loading algorithms, route failures, and invisible alarms that never made it to executive reports because he caught them first. "Because some people only look at the top floors," he said quietly. "They forget somebody had to build the foundation." Ellie frowned like she was trying to picture a building without one. "That sounds silly." Nathan smiled. "It is." Ruth folded her arms, watching him with the respect the rest of the building had misplaced. She had seen him reroute an entire cold storage shipment during a snowstorm in Kansas. She had watched him stay 2 unpaid hours to fix a medical supply delay nobody thanked him for. She had watched him carry Ellie inside on rainy nights, one arm around his daughter, the other holding a laptop bag that seemed heavier every year. In the control room, Preston's voice rose, smooth and confident. Victoria stood beside him, listening, her face reflected in the glass between the world that knew Nathan and the world that judged him. Nathan saw her reflection for one brief moment. She saw his hand resting on Ellie's blanket. Not a technician's hand. A father's hand. A man's hand, worn down by responsibility and still careful enough not to wake a child. Then the main alarm pulsed again, deeper this time. The red light spread across another monitor. Ruth turned toward it. "That does not sound better." Nathan closed his eyes for half a second, listening through the glass, through the voices, through the building itself. "No," he said softly. "It sounds wider." Victoria Hayes had built her public life around never looking uncertain, but that night the glass around her showed too many reflections. In one pane she saw Preston Blake speaking with confidence to the board, his hands moving over the red-lit monitors as if confidence itself could reroute a failing system. In another pane she saw Nathan Brooks in the break room, sitting beside his sleeping daughter with the quiet posture of a man who had already swallowed more disrespect than most people could carry. And in the largest reflection, she saw herself, 31 years old, Chief Executive Officer of Hayes Meridian Systems, wearing the tailored navy blazer her advisors said made her look steady, while the company her father founded trembled under her feet. The board had been circling for months. They smiled in meetings, praised her energy, and asked questions shaped like knives. Was she experienced enough? Was she too loyal to legacy staff? Could she make hard decisions without sentiment? Tomorrow's demonstration was supposed to answer them. A national hospital supply network was watching. Regional distributors were watching. Investors from New York, Atlanta, and Phoenix were flying in by morning. If the system performed, Hayes Meridian would secure a contract that could protect thousands of jobs. If it failed, the board would have every excuse to replace her with someone older, colder, and easier to control. Preston knew that fear. He had fed it carefully. Victoria, he said, lowering his voice as the board members stepped aside, Nathan is a decent maintenance man, but this is not a loose cable at midnight. We need people with credentials the room will respect. She looked through the glass again. Nathan was smoothing Ellie's blanket with one hand. He warned us about the North routing cluster. Preston sighed like patience was costing him. He always warns. That is the trick. Vague enough to sound wise, never clear enough to be accountable. He has kept this place running for years. Night systems, small failures, quiet patches. Useful, yes. But tomorrow is about public confidence. That phrase landed exactly where Preston intended. Public confidence. Not truth. Not competence. The appearance of safety in front of people holding money. Victoria hated that it mattered. She hated more that it did. Preston leaned closer, careful not to sound cruel, only practical. The experts are already in the lobby. Dr. Colin Mercer, Avery Stone, Miles Grant. Their names alone will calm the board. If we let Nathan sit there when the investors arrive and the screen is still red, they will say you trusted a night shift technician over the best in the country. Victoria closed her eyes for one breath. She thought of her father walking the first warehouse floor in work boots, telling her that the people who keep the lights on often stand farthest from the applause. She had believed him when she was young. Then he died, and the applause became pressure, and the pressure became armor. When she opened her eyes, Nathan was looking back through the glass. Not pleading. Not angry. Just waiting to see who she would become. Victoria walked to the break room door. Ruth Coleman stepped aside but did not lower her gaze. Ellie sat up, sleepy and confused. Nathan stood. If they need me after this, he said quietly, where do you want me? Preston answered before Victoria could. Try not to be too far from the janitor closet. The words hit the room hard enough that even one of the board members looked uncomfortable. Nathan's face did not change. That was the strange dignity of him. Insults seemed to pass through his pride and stop at his principles. Victoria should have corrected Preston. She knew at the moment she stayed silent. Instead, she said, stay nearby, Mr. Brooks. For support only. Nathan nodded once. Understood. Ellie reached for his hand. He squeezed it gently, then let go. As Victoria turned back toward the control room, the main system alarm deepened again, and the red light spread across the routing map like a warning nobody wanted to read. The experts arrived as if the building had ordered confidence and received it in 3 polished pieces. Dr. Colin Mercer entered first, carrying a slim equipment case and wearing a charcoal suit that still looked fresh after travel. Avery Stone followed with 2 laptops tucked under one arm, her expression sharp, focused, and unreadable. Miles Grant came last, quiet and precise, rolling a diagnostic case whose wheels clicked softly across the control room floor. Preston Blake met them with a smile wide enough for the board to see. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, turning toward Victoria and the executives gathered beneath the red glow of the wall screens, this is the team that will get us back on schedule. The sentence gave the room permission to breathe, but only a little. The routing map was still flashing. The frozen conveyor simulation still stuttered. The central alarm still pulsed low and steady, like the heartbeat of a building trying to warn its own owners. Victoria shook each expert's hand, grateful for the visible shape of competence. Degrees, reputations, conference photographs, published systems protocols. These were things she could present to investors. These were things the board understood. Through the glass near the hallway, Nathan Brooks stood outside the control room with Ellie's small hoodie folded over his arm. He did not try to enter. He did not tap the glass. He simply watched the experts unpack their tools and open the first diagnostic branch on the main console. Ellie sat behind him in the break room with Ruth Coleman, sipping milk from a small carton, her sleepy eyes moving between her father and the people now occupying his chair. Are those the helpers? She asked. Ruth looked at Nathan's reflection in the glass. They are supposed to be. Preston guided Colin toward the main console. We ran a preliminary sequence. North routing cluster appears unstable. Brooks kept circling back to sync delay, but we think the fastest path is a cluster reset. Nathan's gaze lowered to the floor for 1 second. Not in defeat. In recognition. A man hears a door close differently when he knows what is behind it. Avery scanned the data. Miles connected an external monitor. Colin leaned toward the screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Why is the error cascade repeating in 6-minute intervals? Preston answered too quickly. Residual fault noise. We need to clear the cluster and force a new baseline. Nathan, behind the glass, shook his head once, almost invisible. Victoria saw it. She wished she had not. There was something unnerving about a man who stayed quiet with so much certainty. Proceed, Preston said. Colin did not move. His eyes had shifted from the monitor to the glass wall. To Nathan. At first, it was only a glance, the kind a professional gives a stranger standing where a staff member should not be. Then Colin's hand froze over the keyboard. Avery noticed and looked up. Miles followed his gaze. Nathan looked back at them with the calm sadness of someone meeting ghosts from a life he had already buried. Preston frowned. Is there a problem? Colin did not answer right away. The red alarm washed over his face. The room waited. Victoria watched the expert she had flown in from Denver stare at the night shift technician she had just removed. Then Colin slowly straightened, his voice suddenly quieter than before. Who is that man outside the glass? Preston turned, irritated. That is Nathan Brooks. Maintenance support. Do not worry about him. But Avery had gone pale with recognition, and Miles had taken one step back from the console as if the room had shifted under his shoes. Nathan lowered his eyes toward Ellie's hoodie in his hands. No pride. No performance. Just silence. And for the first time that night, the experts looked less like rescuers and more like students who had just seen the teacher they never expected to face again. Preston Blake's irritation sharpened the moment he saw the experts looking at Nathan Brooks instead of the failing system. We do not have time for distractions, Preston said, forcing a laugh that did not land. Dr. Mercer, the console is yours. But Colin Mercer did not sit back down. He walked toward the glass wall with slow, careful steps, the kind a man takes when memory has become more important than protocol. Avery Stone followed halfway, her laptop still open in one hand. Miles Grant removed his glasses and stared at Nathan as if checking the years against the face. Victoria looked from one expert to the next, her confidence beginning to thin. Dr. Mercer, she asked. Colin did not take his eyes off Nathan. Sir, he said softly, is that you? The control room fell still. Nathan stood outside the glass with Ellie's hoodie folded over his arm, his shoulders quiet, his expression almost apologetic. He did not nod. He did not deny it. He simply waited. Avery stepped closer to the door. Nathan Brooks. Her voice carried a tremor of respect that made several board members glance at one another. Miles swallowed, then whispered the words that changed the entire temperature of the room. He trained us. No alarm could have made the room quieter than that sentence did. Preston's face tightened. That is impossible. Colin turned toward him, and the polished certainty Preston had rented for the night suddenly belonged to someone else. No, it is not. Before I was brought into National Automation Response, Mr. Brooks ran the Crisis Systems program at the National Systems Institute. Avery nodded slowly. He wrote half the failure mapping protocols we still use. Miles looked toward Nathan with something close to shame. He taught us to listen before touching the keyboard. Victoria felt the words land one by one, each one stripping away the easy story she had accepted. Night shift technician. Maintenance support. Not enough for public confidence. Through the glass, Nathan looked down at Ellie's hoodie, folding one sleeve over the other with careful hands. He seemed less like a man being revealed and more like a man enduring the return of a life he had chosen to leave behind. Preston recovered first because pride often speaks before truth has finished entering the room. Credentials expire, he said. People leave for reasons. Colin's eyes hardened, not with anger, but with disappointment. People also leave because they have something more important to protect. Ruth Coleman opened the control room door from the hallway side, and Nathan stepped in only because Colin moved aside for him with unmistakable respect. Ellie watched from the break room, now fully awake, one hand against the glass. Nathan did not look at the board. He looked at Victoria. "I was not trying to embarrass anyone," he said. Victoria's throat tightened. That was the grace of him, and somehow it made her mistake feel heavier. "Why did you not tell me?" she asked. Nathan gave a faint, tired smile. "You never asked who I was. You asked me to step back." The sentence did not accuse. That was why it hurt. The red system map flashed again, and this time even Preston flinched. Colin turned to Nathan like a student returning to first principles. "Sir, we are missing something in the cascade." Nathan looked at the wall display, then at the north routing cluster, then at the timing stamps rolling in uneven intervals. His face changed, not into pride, but into purpose. "You are missing the reason it repeats every 6 minutes," he said. Victoria stepped closer, no longer seeing a night worker in a wrinkled shirt, but a man whose quiet had been mistaken for emptiness. The room waited for him now. Not because of his badge. Not because of his title. Because the people hired to replace him had just shown everyone where real expertise had learned its name. Victoria Hayes had heard many people describe expertise, but she had never seen a room rearrange itself around it so quietly. Nathan Brooks did not take the main chair right away. He stood behind it, studying the red wall display while Colin Mercer, Avery Stone, and Miles Grant waited with the focus of people who remembered being taught by him in harder rooms than this one. The board members, who minutes earlier had barely looked at him, now watched with embarrassed attention. Preston Blake stood near the back of the control room, his arms folded too tightly, his face arranged into doubt, but his eyes kept moving toward the timing stamps. Nathan noticed. He always noticed what people tried to hide in rhythm. "The 6-minute repeat is not random," Nathan said. "It is a correction loop trying to repair damage from a bad instruction." Avery stepped closer to the console. "A scheduled update?" "Not scheduled," Nathan replied. "Forced." Miles pulled up the deployment log. Colin leaned in, and for a moment the three experts looked exactly like students again, not diminished by it, but made honest by it. Victoria stood near the glass wall, her reflection layered over the break room where Ellie had fallen back asleep beside Ruth Coleman. That image struck her harder than any resume could have. Nathan had not left the top of his field because he failed. He had stepped away because a little girl needed a father more than the industry needed another celebrated name. Colin spoke first, his voice low with reverence. At the Institute, he used to say the loudest alert is rarely the first mistake. Avery nodded. He made us trace failure backward until ego stopped getting in the way. Miles added, and he never let us touch a keyboard until we could explain what the system was trying to protect. Nathan looked uncomfortable with the praise. He kept his eyes on the data. "You learned because you worked hard. We learned because you taught us how to be careful," Colin said. The room settled into a different kind of silence then, not the silence of panic, but of recognition. Victoria remembered every dismissive thought she had allowed to pass through her mind that night. Wrinkled shirt. Night shift. Support only. She had mistaken sacrifice for smallness. She had mistaken humility for lack. Preston cleared his throat. "This history lesson is touching, but the investors arrive in less than 11 hours. Nathan turned toward him. "Then we should ask why someone pushed an unverified update into live operations." Preston's face barely changed, but the skin around his eyes tightened. Updates happen. Not without a secondary approval chain. Nathan pointed to the screen. This one bypassed simulation, skipped load testing, and wrote over the fallback timing table. That is not an accident. Victoria's breath caught. Who approved it? Miles typed quickly. The log opened. The room leaned in. Preston took one small step forward, too fast to look casual. Those records are messy during emergency deployment. Nathan did not raise his voice. Truth is only messy when someone handled it wrong. Avery found the approval line and went still. Colin looked at Preston. Miles looked at Victoria. The name on the log did not need to be spoken loudly. Preston Blake. The quiet became heavy. Preston straightened his tie. I authorized a speed optimization to make sure tomorrow's demo would impress the board. It was a leadership decision. Nathan looked at the red map spreading across the wall. Leadership does not gamble with a system that delivers hospital supplies. Victoria turned slowly toward Preston, and something in her face changed forever. Until that moment, she had feared looking inexperienced. Now she feared something worse, becoming the kind of leader who trusted polished confidence over quiet truth. Nathan stepped toward the console at last, not to reclaim status, but because the system was still failing and people beyond that glass building would need it by morning. I can stabilize it, he said. But no one touches anything unless we do this clean. Colin, Avery, and Miles moved behind him without hesitation. Not as replacements. As students standing behind the teacher they had finally found again. Preston Blake tried to turn the room back toward himself because that was what men like him did when truth stepped too close. You are all overreacting, he said, his voice smooth but thinner now. The update was aggressive, yes, but this company needed bold decisions. The board wanted speed. The investors wanted confidence. I made a call. Nathan Brooks sat at the main console, but he did not look like a man enjoying power. He looked like a father trying to fix a broken lock before morning because people on the other side needed the door to open. Colin Mercer stood behind his left shoulder, Avery Stone watched the timing graph, and Miles Grant monitored the live node map. The three experts spoke less now, not because they had nothing to offer, but because they knew the value of listening when the right person was finally in the chair. Victoria Hayes stood near the glass wall, her hands folded tightly in front of her, seeing every red warning as a reminder of the decision she had almost made permanent. Preston stepped closer. Nathan, you walked away from this world. You do not get to come back and act like you understand executive pressure. Nathan's fingers paused above the keyboard. He turned just enough to meet Preston's eyes. I did not come back for reputation. The room held its breath. Then why? Preston asked. Nathan glanced through the glass toward the break room, where Ellie slept beneath Ruth Coleman's watchful care. Because if this system fails, hospital shipments delay, warehouse teams scramble, drivers get rerouted for hundreds of miles, and people who never sat in this room pay the price. That is why. No one spoke. Not the board. Not Preston. Not even Victoria. The hum of the servers filled the space like a low organ note. Nathan turned back to the display. Avery, isolate the north routing cluster without resetting it. Done, Avery said. Miles, pull the fallback timing table from yesterday's last clean snapshot. Working. Colin, compare Preston's update against the cold chain priority rules. Colin typed quickly, then stopped. There it is. The update treats medical refrigeration routes like standard freight during load balancing. Victoria's face changed. That would delay hospital supply trucks. Only under stress, Preston said quickly. And the demo would have looked faster if it held. Nathan looked at the red cascade widening across the map. You risked the whole system to look important. The words were quiet, but they reached every corner of the room. Preston's jaw tightened. Careful, Brooks. Nathan did not flinch. No. Careful is what you should have been before you signed that approval. Victoria stepped forward, and this time her voice carried the authority Preston had been pretending to own. Preston, step away from operations. He looked at her, stunned. Victoria, you need me. I needed honesty. That silenced him more completely than anger could have. Ruth appeared in the doorway, drawn by the shift in the room, and Ellie stirred behind her. Nathan saw his daughter's small face through the glass and softened for one heartbeat before returning to the screen. We have one clean path, he said. But if we push it wrong, the error spreads into the southern distribution nodes. Colin nodded. Then we do it the way you taught us. Nathan took a slow breath. The panic in the control room began to settle into discipline. Screens still flashed red. Time was still running out. Investors would still arrive in the morning. But something had changed that no system alert could measure. The experts no longer stood in Nathan's place. They stood with him. Victoria no longer watched him as backup. She watched him as the person who might teach her what leadership should have looked like all along. And Preston, standing silent near the edge of the room, finally understood that the man he had tried to make invisible had become the only person everyone could see. By 4:17 in the morning, the control room had stopped sounding like panic and started sounding like work. The voices were lower now. Cleaner. Focused. Nathan Brooks sat at the main console with Colin Mercer, Avery Stone, and Miles Grant behind him, not crowded around him, not trying to take over, but moving with the discipline of people who remembered what it meant to be taught well. Victoria Hayes stood a few feet away, no longer giving orders just to prove she could. She listened. That alone changed the room. Preston Blake remained near the wall under the watch of two board members, his badge deactivated for operations access, his polished confidence reduced to silence. The red routing map still pulsed across the wall, but now Nathan could see the shape beneath the noise. 3 minutes, he said. Victoria looked at him. 3 minutes until what? Until the next correction loop fires. If we interrupt it early, the system fights us. If we wait too long, the southern nodes inherit the bad timing. We need everyone quiet. No one argued. That may have been the first miracle of the night. The control room settled into a silence so complete that Ellie's soft breathing could almost be felt through the glass of the break room. Ruth Coleman sat beside the child with folded hands, watching Nathan like she had always known this day would come, not because he wanted applause, but because truth has a way of returning to the person who kept it safe. On the wall display, the seconds moved. Nathan did not rush. His right hand hovered near the keyboard. His left traced a small pattern on the desk, not typing, just following the rhythm of the system in his mind. Colin whispered, North cluster isolated. Avery said, clean snapshot loaded. Miles said, cold chain priority rules restored and waiting. Nathan nodded once. Do not apply them until I say. Victoria watched his face, the tired eyes, the calm mouth, the weight of a man who had chosen bedtime stories over boardrooms and still somehow carried more authority than anyone in the building. She thought about how easily she had let Preston call him support only. She thought about her father, who once told her that a leader should know the names of the people who keep the doors open after midnight. The red map flickered. Nathan leaned closer. Now. Keys moved. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just clean, precise, almost gentle. Avery confirmed the fallback table. Miles locked the cold chain routes. Colin reversed the forced update sequence and held the north cluster steady. The wall display stuttered once, then twice. Preston lifted his head, hoping for failure. Victoria stopped breathing. Then one red line turned amber. Another turned white. The frozen routing map began to move. Slowly at first, like a body waking after a long fever. Then the hospital supply routes lit green from Kansas City to Tulsa, from Omaha to Little Rock, from Dallas to Memphis. The main alarm softened into a single quiet tone, then stopped. No one cheered. The room did not know how. The expert stared at the screen with humble relief. The board members stood frozen. Victoria put one hand against the back of a chair, not because she was weak, but because the weight she had been carrying finally had somewhere to go. Nathan leaned back, eyes closing for 1 second. Through the glass, Ellie sat up, saw the green screens, and smiled before anyone told her what they meant. Ruth wiped the corner of one eye and pretended she had not. "System stable," Avery said softly. Miles checked the live routes. "Distribution recovery confirmed." Colin looked at Nathan, his voice low with respect. "Clean save." Nathan opened his eyes and looked at the green wall, then at Victoria. "It will hold for the demo," he said. "But only if you tell the investors the truth about the update." Victoria nodded slowly. This time, there was no hesitation. "I will." And in that control room full of experts, executives, screens, and silence, the man they had pushed aside did not look victorious. He looked relieved that the people outside the room would get what they needed on time. By 9:30 the next morning, Hayes Meridian Systems looked calm enough to fool anyone who had not seen it bleeding red before dawn. The lobby floors shone beneath soft white lights. The investor badges were printed. Coffee steamed on polished counters. A wall of live routing maps glowed green behind the main presentation stage, showing trucks, warehouse nodes, and hospital supply paths moving with quiet precision across 7 states. Victoria Hayes stood in front of the board, the investors, the senior staff, and the external experts, but for the first time in many months, she did not feel the need to hide behind perfect confidence. Nathan Brooks stood near the side of the room with Ellie beside him and Ruth Coleman a few steps away, his employee badge back on his shirt, his sleeves still creased from the long night, his face calm in a way that made the applause unnecessary before it even began. Preston Blake was not on the operations floor anymore. His access had been suspended pending review, and the board had already received the deployment records showing what he had approved, what he had skipped, and who he had tried to blame. Victoria could have buried the truth in careful language. She could have called it an internal adjustment, a miscommunication, a corrected technical irregularity. That was the easy corporate path. But easy paths had almost cost her the company, and worse, they had almost taught every quiet worker in the building that honesty only mattered when it came from someone in a suit. She stepped to the front, looked at Nathan, then looked at the room. "Last night, this system did not fail because of the people who maintain it," she said. "It nearly failed because leadership trusted appearance over responsibility." The investors went still. The board members shifted. Nathan lowered his eyes, not embarrassed, just unwilling to turn truth into theater. Victoria continued, her voice steady. "I removed a man from the console because I saw his job title before I saw his value. I accepted confidence because it sounded polished, and I overlooked competence because it stood quietly in a wrinkled shirt after a long shift." Ellie looked up at her father. Ruth smiled faintly. Colin Mercer stepped forward first. "For the record," he said, facing the room, "Nathan Brooks trained me in crisis systems response." Avery Stone stood beside him. "He trained me as well." Miles Grant added, "Most of what made us useful last night began in his classroom." The silence that followed was not awkward. It was heavy with correction. People were rearranging the story in their minds, replacing the night guy with the teacher, the maintenance support with the foundation, the single dad in the break room with the man who had protected the company while no one was watching. Victoria turned fully toward Nathan. "Mr. Brooks, I am sorry. Not privately. Not quietly. Publicly. You deserved respect before anyone knew your past." Nathan looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Thank you. No bitterness. No performance." That was the grace of him, and somehow it made the apology feel even more necessary. Victoria took a breath. I would like you to build and lead our internal systems training program. Not as an emergency replacement. As the standard this company should have had all along. The room waited. Nathan looked down at Ellie. She squeezed his hand. Daddy, she whispered, now they know you built the foundation. His tired smile was small, but it reached his eyes. Then he looked back at Victoria. I will do it on one condition. Victoria nodded. Name it. Nathan's voice stayed quiet, but every person heard him. No one in this building is invisible. Not the night technician. Not the security guard. Not the warehouse clerk. Not the single parent doing homework between alarms. If I train people here, they learn that first. Victoria did not hesitate. Agreed. By noon, the investors had seen a working system and a company brave enough to tell the truth about how it had almost failed. But the people who were there remembered something more important than the contract. They remembered 3 experts standing behind the man who had once taught them. They remembered a chief executive officer strong enough to admit she had been wrong. They remembered Ruth Coleman wiping one quiet tear near the security desk, and Ellie standing taller beside her father than she had the night before. And Nathan Brooks, who had never needed applause to know his own worth, finally stood in a room that understood silence differently. This time, it was not dismissal. It was respect.